Howdy, folks. I'm George Finney, and I'm here to help you be more well aware when it comes to cybersecurity. And today we're here to talk about the seventh of the 9 cybersecurity habits. I think it's the most important of the 9 cybersecurity habits, and it is community. So you might have heard of this saying, if you're living in the United States, united we stand, divided we fall. And I think in cybersecurity, we like to play our cards close to the vest. We can sometimes feel like we're going it alone. And I think we do ourselves a disservice if we are going it alone in cybersecurity, because how we improve our cybersecurity is through community. It's easy to think, okay, well, if I just disconnect myself from the network, then I'll be secure. While that might be a good idea to ensure your security, it's not a great idea if you're trying to run a business and you need to connect with your customers or clients. So what does community mean as a habit, and how do we get to that next level? I think it's a real challenge, but just like all the habits, making it a habit, making it easy over time, you will adjust, and it'll become a bigger part of your life. So where I want to start is actually with this person. His name is Abraham Maslow. So he is famous for a number of things. His hierarchy of needs. If you've taken a psychology 101 course, you've probably heard that. But what Maslow is really known for, what the difference that he made is, in the 1950s, well, prior to the 1950s, most psychologists studied dysfunctional people in order to kind of understand what's going on in the human mind. So think of Sigmund Freud or Carl Jung, those kinds of folks. They were obviously very important to the development of psychology, but Maslow's contribution is, well, if I'm giving advice, if I'm trying to help people become healthy, successful people, if I'm only studying people with dysfunctions or brain diseases or those kinds of things, I'm not going to be able to help a person become healthy, happy, and successful. So instead, what he did is he started studying healthy people, and he started studying successful people, and he's really considered one of the fathers of the positive psychology movement. And so things that we've talked about in the masterclass before, things like Stephen Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, are kind of a direct outgrowth of Maslow's work. And so this shift, right? We've in cybersecurity, think about how we've learned up until now. We study people who have been hacked. We study people who've been breached, and we do those things in order to not be breached ourselves, right? We don't want to make the same mistakes as other people. We prefer to learn the easy way rather than the hard way. However, I would argue that where we're at in cybersecurity today, we need to make this same shift that Maslow shepherded in the 1950s. We need to study successful, healthy people. So we kind of touched on this a little bit in the introduction, but really I think where we get the most benefit out of that is with the habit of community. So in the book, I actually interviewed a lot of people, many more than we're actually told their stories in the book. And a lot of them had NDAs in place, and they couldn't talk about things on the record. We worked with some public affairs groups for companies because they didn't want their employees to talk about some of the things that they'd experienced. And in part, they don't want to put a target on their backs. No pun intended with the company target. But that I think is a challenge that we need to overcome. And if we want the next generation of cybersecurity professionals to be better than us, and we do, we have to be able to share our stories. We have to come together as a community, so we're not learning the same lessons or relearning the same lessons over and over again. And what we do know for sure is that the bad guys are cooperating. They're collaborating. They're sharing information. And if you and I don't share information, then the bad guys can get us both. But if one member of that community shares, then we all can benefit, and we reduce our susceptibility, our vulnerability as a whole. And I think that's how we get better. Um, but before I leave Maslow, I do want to stop and talk about his hierarchy of needs, because this really comes together in the 9 habits. I think it really makes a difference with us as individuals in forming habits, right? So if you're not familiar with the hierarchy of needs, you start with your basic needs, your food, water, shelter, sleep. And you have to kind of build that foundation before you can get to what he calls self-fulfillment or self-actualization. But really, that just means living up to your potential for whatever gifts you have that you've been given. Reaching those, fulfilling them is actually personally very fulfilling. That's what it means to be happy, healthy, and successful. And to get there, you have to have your basic needs met. You have to have a strong foundation. And so what he tells people is, if you're hungry, perpetually hungry, you're not going to be thinking about things like love, falling in love and reaching your full potential, being self-fulfilled. If you're drowning, you're not going to be thinking about how hungry you are, right? So that's that ladder, that pyramid of needs. But as you look at the pyramid, part of your basic needs, the second tier of the foundation, is safety and security. That's a basic part of what everyone in our communities need in order to reach their full potential. If you're worried about being laid off, if you're worried about being yelled at or fired because you messed up, you're not going to feel free. You're not going to have the opportunity to be creative, to explore, to feel like you're going to be fulfilled in your career. And I think that's what everyone in our companies, everyone in our communities needs. We all have this equal need to be safe and secure. And if we're not reaching that, we're not reaching our full potential as an organization, or as a country, or as a world. And I think security has a really unique role to play in helping our world improve as a whole for everyone. And so, you probably recognize this person. If you don't recognize him for whatever reason, this is President Bill Clinton. Bill Clinton, actually, from a cybersecurity perspective, was responsible for one of the most progressive initiatives at the time in history. So in '98, in May of 1998, President Clinton signed what was called Presidential Decision Directive 63. So today, that's known as the Critical Infrastructure Protection Provisions. But this directive established this concept of Information Sharing and Analysis Centers, or ISACs. And ISACs are incredibly important to the security community. I'm a member of one as a university, but the National Council of ISACs has 24 different member ISACs that represent 24 different industries. So each industry has its own information sharing and analysis center, and they share intel. So the finance industry has one, the retail industry has one, the power industry. They all have their own unique sharing centers. They have active mailing lists. They share threat intel data. They talk about different vendors they use, and they collaborate and cooperate, even though their companies might be competitors in those industries. They collaborate because we all need to be secure, right? That is a foundation of all of us, whether we're competitors or not, in order to improve as collectively as an organization. We'll say this in a minute, but a rising tide raises all ships. If you're not familiar with that, you'll hear me say it again. But what this really allows, each member of an ISAC security community, it allows us to increase our maturity at a more rapid pace than if we were just going it alone by ourselves, figuring out things as we go. And so this community building process doesn't have to be limited to huge corporations or even governments, but neighborhood associations, PTAs, are all formed for the same reasons. If you've ever used the Nextdoor app on your phone, right? That Nextdoor app uses geolocation to see what your neighbors are up to in your area. Sometimes it's to help find a lost dog. Sometimes it's to report a stolen package or hearing gunshots. But by far, the majority of conversations on Nextdoor or Ring, the doorbell app, they all have these community safety kind of initiatives. We're building security communities with these, and that's incredibly important for all of us to help improve our security in our communities together. We all play a role. And so, Margaret Mead said this, but never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has. And I think that's incredibly powerful, right? Sometimes, again, going back to the skepticism habit, we can feel powerless. We feel like we can't make a difference. And actually, we can make a difference. When we talked about the culture habit, you'll recall that it only takes about 25% of a group to create real, lasting social change. It doesn't take 100%. It doesn't take 50%. So, just collaborating with a small group of people can make a massive difference. And so in computer circles, right, this actually was created, as you might have guessed with the pictures of the phones, early on in the telecommunications industry, the 1950s and 60s, but it's called Netcast Law. And it's been applied to social media, to ISACs, to user groups, but the value of a network increases with the square of the number of members. And think about that, right? If you just have 5 members, right, you have an extraordinary extension of your network. If you've got 12 members, right, look at the difference between the connections that you can make. So when you get into thousands or tens of thousands or millions of members, that power only increases over time. That ability to make that spontaneous connection that could get you information before an attacker uses it is incredibly important. So one of the studies that I did at SMU is I polled my users. I wanted to figure out if they had been victims of identity theft. We tell people not to use social media. And so I asked them, well, if you do use social media, how much do you use it? And have you been the victim of a data breach? And so, the answer that I got back is actually the opposite of the advice that we give to people. It actually turns out that the more people use Facebook or LinkedIn or others, the less likely it was that they would have been the victim of identity theft. And I think that's because of the power of their networks, right? The more they're exposed to the potential dangers, the more likely they'll be able to take action on that and do something about it. And so I love this quote by Groucho Marx, but we have this feeling like this resonates with us. I refuse to join any club that would have me as a member. There's that that reluctance to participate. That's a real challenge. And in cybersecurity, we take it to the next level. This actually comes from World War II, but there was this phrase that came up: "Loose lips sink ships." So it was a series of propaganda posters actually during World War II, but it was really meant to remind citizens, government officials, military officers, not to talk openly about the war. And we didn't know whether there were people in our midst that were stealing that information. So it made sense at the time. But the problem with this approach, when it comes to cybersecurity, that is, it values secrecy over community. And as I said before, the hackers that are attacking us already have more information about us, about our industries or our companies, than we're really aware of. And the only way we have to combat this imbalance is through communication. And so instead of loose lips sink ships, we really have to think about the idea that a rising tide raises all ships, right? If we get more secure as a community together, what that means is it becomes more expensive for the attackers to get their hacking done. They can't sell as many social security numbers or credit card numbers on the dark web. It actually is an economic disincentive for them doing what they do. So, the real big issue that we face as an industry is that we don't necessarily think of the bad guys as our competition. We think of the company down the road who might, recruit away our best people. Vendors think other vendors, competing for business are their opponents. But when it comes to security, we really have to cooperate instead of competing. And so there's this analogy we throw around a lot in the security industry that, cybersecurity is like the bear in the woods, right? So I don't necessarily have to outrun you. I don't have to run the bear. I just have to outrun you. And I would flip that. So first, like that's a bad analogy because the bear has its own motivations, and you may just look more delicious to it than the other person, even if they're a slower runner. But let's take this analogy a step further. What if instead of me and you running, both of us stood our ground and fought the bear together, right? Okay, well, maybe 2 of us still don't have a shot against the bear, but what about 5? What about 10 of us? What if we have some sharp pointy sticks? Again, as a community, we have a better chance if we work together. And so I know we're in the midst of a pandemic, and there's been a lot of talk about herd immunity. But what herd immunity gets us is the ability to limit the impact of whatever it is that we're facing. And I think herd immunity also applies to cybersecurity. So in this example, right, if there are enough people that are immune, they can operate as a shield to prevent infections from spreading to people that are still vulnerable, right? And hopefully, I've heard suggestions that we'll reach herd immunity with COVID in the next, say 3 to 6 months. And I think that's mostly a function of how many people are getting it now. But the same is true for cybersecurity, right? If a hacker spends, a week researching an organization only to find that they're immune, that their protections are good enough, they'll have wasted that week, right? That's a week that they weren't spending hacking other companies. And so why is this important? There are still a lot of people that are very vulnerable. And there's this concept of the cybersecurity poverty line. This is actually, I think, about 7 years old. So Dr. Wendy Nather, who works at Duo Security, actually coined the term. But this is an actual chart. So that kind of really depicts it. I think this makes it real for me. So what Gartner as a company says, their industry analysts say that 5% of a company's budget is normally dedicated to IT. So if you're, a $100 million organization, that's cool. That means you spend about $5 million a year on IT. Gartner further goes and says that 5% of your IT budget is normally dedicated to cybersecurity. So again, if you're a $100 million company, what that means is you spend $5 million on your IT budget, and probably 5% of that, or about, I would say $250,000 a year, is dedicated towards cybersecurity. And a $10 million company might only spend $25,000 a year on cybersecurity. So the difference there is really huge, right? That means that you probably don't have a dedicated, a single dedicated cybersecurity employee, right? You're lucky to have just a couple of IT staff. And those folks are probably generalists doing a lot of different things. So, when you look at the chart, as you go up, you probably only get your first dedicated cybersecurity person. And not to say that dedicated cybersecurity staff is the measure of whether you're going to be hacked or not. But it gives you an idea of just order of magnitude. So until you get, upwards of say $30 million in revenue, and that's a huge company. I would love to have my own company that had $30 million a year in revenue, but you're still going to be very vulnerable. And so I contrast the small business with a company like JP Chase, who has a dedicated cybersecurity budget of over $1 billion a year, and over 1,000 dedicated cybersecurity staff members. Again, compared with SMU as a university, that's more than the employees that we have as a university. That's bigger than our endowment as a university, and they spend that every year on cybersecurity. There's a vast difference. And as SMU, we're still doing okay. But if you're a nonprofit that maybe only has a $5 million a year budget, that's a real challenge. So probably most of the people in cybersecurity that are employed in cybersecurity today work for Fortune 500, Fortune 1000 companies. Most don't work for small businesses or nonprofits. And when you look at the government statistics, 99.7% of all U.S. employer firms are small businesses. 49.2% of the workforce works for small businesses. So really, this cybersecurity poverty line. I mean, this section down at the bottom, the curve there. That means that 99% of firms don't have any security, right? That's an incredibly vulnerable part of our country's economy. And again, security through community. How do we focus on not the Fortune 500, the Fortune 1000? How do we focus on small businesses and help them improve, so that we can really, again, a rising tide raises all ships. How do we rise that tide together and make a difference? I would challenge us all to think about that. It's not just us. It's not just having a great security program inside your company, inside your university. It's about improving everyone. And I think we have to think about answers to that. And some of those answers might be really challenging, but it's going to require us to not compete. It's going to require us to work together. And the good news is that security is in our DNA. I say this every time, and it's just as true now as it was with habit number one. And being part of our communities is also a part of our DNA. Again, I think community is the most important cybersecurity habit that we have. So as you go through the prompts, think about how you can better collaborate, how you can connect with people about cybersecurity. Is it downloading the Nextdoor app and participating and seeing what's out there just for awareness? Is it, hey, I'm going to post a video if I see a suspicious person in my neighborhood? All of those things, those habits are really important. One concept is actually in terms of random acts of security. I think of just like random acts of happiness, right? How do you make the world a better place in terms of security? So some sample recipes. Before I go home at night, I'm going to check my home security app. And then I'm from Texas, so I'm going to treat myself to some Whataburger on the way home. Or at the beginning of the year, I'm going to set aside 30 minutes a month to participate in whatever community or organize a community event or something along those lines to help make a difference. So we have, this is actually the last masterclass of 2020. Mirroring and deception will follow up with in January, but I hope you all have a restful holiday, and we'll see you next time.